All right, hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Star Wars Mark of Balance. My name is Mark, and today we're going to be discussing the second arc of Andor Season 2, Episodes 4 through 6. Now, I'll be upfront, these three episodes are not going to be everyone's cup of tea because these are the most setup-heavy episodes that we've gotten in all of Andor, which is saying a lot because Andor has really made a name on these slow-burn, meticulous episodes that build up to a climax in Episode 3. In these three episodes, we don't get that big bombastic climax that we've gotten before. We just get the inciting incident of what's to come later. These episodes are dense with a lot of moving pieces, a lot of show don't tell, and a lot of world building that you need to really lock in to pick up on all of the little bits and pieces of detail that the Andor writing crew have crammed into these three 50-minute episodes. I want to be very delicate with how I word this next point because it may come off as overly critical, but I do think it needs to be said. While I love the world building and the methodical nature of these episodes, I do think it becomes a bit overindulgent at points. What I mean by that is there is times in here that feel redundant. Some scenes with Cyril and some of the world building done on Gorman feels like time that could have been allocated to characters that I felt got sidelined in this arc, like Mon Mothma, or Bix's arc ending a bit abruptly. As I go through the review, I think you'll understand my point a bit more, and I want to reiterate that I don't think any scenes in these episodes are bad. I think everything is contributing to the story. I just think that some scenes were overkill, and we had gotten the point already, and they were redundant, like I said. I personally don't think these episodes would have worked if they were released weekly. I think there would have been a lot of frustration having to wait a week after each of these episodes, and I think Tony and Disney knew that, and that's why they're releasing these in 3-episode chunks. But now seeing it, I understand it a bit more. Now that I've gotten my less than positive overall thoughts out of the way, I want to get into my positives because, like I said, I loved the meticulous world building that went into Gorman and Gorman society. From the way that they dress, they're all very fashionable. You know that their culture is very based upon their industry of fashion. I love the set designs where you could see different spider architecture and spider iconography on the walls that feeds into the spiders that they rely on for their silk. Obviously, Cyril is getting these little spider mascots as antiques to display in his apartment. They're very proud of their culture. We spend a lot of time in this city square that gets you familiarized with it, similar to what happened with Ferrix. We got so familiar with the different shops, Marva's home, the city center, the bell tower, all of it felt familiarized by the end, and when the finale happens, it's really impactful because you feel like you know this place inside and out. And the same is happening here on Gorman. I love the obvious ties to Nazi-occupied France in World War II and the French Liberation Movement. All the Gormans speak with a French accent, and their language itself sounds like French. And it's important to their identity that they had their own language to speak, and they didn't just speak English like a bunch of other worlds in the galaxy. It really embeds us in this beautiful culture that's been around for thousands of years, and the tragedy that we're about to witness doesn't feel like another casualty of the Imperial war machine. It's really going to feel like we're losing something precious. I'm also obsessed with new hand gestures and new greetings that different pieces of fictional media come up with, like the Dune knife salute or the Attack on Titan give your heart salute. I just love when fictional things just come up with new hand gestures, and we get one here with a new greeting and goodbye where they say till then, and then they open their hand in a sweeping motion like an open door, and it's really beautiful. Again, I love these little details here. And as always with Andor, we have some great character work over these 3 episodes. 2 MVPs for me that I was shocked by, but I absolutely loved their stories in this arc were Kleya and Saw Gerrara. That whole scene where Kleya is trying to remove the bug from the artifact was so tense. I really connected with her character a lot in these episodes in a way that I hadn't previously. And Saw Gerrara might have the best scene in these 3 episodes where he is convincing Wilmon to take his mask off, but he's really trying to convince him to join his cause. And you really see Saw's dedication to the rebellion, or his form of the rebellion. It's fantastic. It's intense. It's kind of scary. It's beautiful in a way. I loved it. The last piece of my overall thoughts that I want to touch on before I dive into the individual character arcs in these 3 episodes is this idea and this through line of love and relationships and connection overall in times of war and rebellion. There are a lot of scenes centered around relationships in these 3 episodes, more than we've seen in other parts of Andor. We have Cassian and Bix coming together. We have Vel and Cinta reuniting. We have Dedra and Cyril, which is real hot and heavy. We also get a familial love between Mon Mothma and her cousin Vel, and she asks Luthen how she is. Now, as I mentioned, there was 2 sides to this coin. On the good side, our characters were putting their relationship before the cause and before the rebellion. Cassian wants to protect Bix at all costs and even confronts Luthen and offers him an ultimatum where he's like, you either get me and Bix or I'm out. With Vel and Cinta, Vel says that the only reason she accepted this mission from Luthen was if Cinta was there as well. And I think Luthen is such an interesting character to put in the middle of all of this because in the first season, his big moment was him admitting that he had no connections, that he had gotten rid of everyone and everything he cared about to solely focus on the rebellion. And while in season 1, this was looked at as a heroic sacrifice, and it still is, these 3 episodes really reframe that entire worldview to say, you have to remember what you're fighting for. And what you're fighting for is love and connection and relationships and the people you care about. And Luthen has forgotten about that. Mon Mothma, when they are talking at the party, she's like, how's Vel? And he kind of shrugs it off like, why do you care? And she's like, well, she's family. Like, of course I care. And I just thought this was a beautiful sentiment to bring back around that, this show has depicted the sacrifices and the terrible choices that people have to make for the rebellion or for a rebellion to succeed. But it also needed to remind us that in the middle of all that, the reason you fight is for the people you love. Marva was a great example of it in season 1. And while I know we're going to keep seeing sacrifices and people putting the rebellion before themselves or their relationships, I do think this was a very important theme that they injected into this arc. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we see Dedra and Cyril just completely using each other. Dedra and Partagaz literally talk about, don't tell Cyril the whole story, keep using him because he's the perfect tool. And on the other end, you see that Cyril still has that ambition in him. He gets the pat on the back from Partagaz, and he's like, this is the best day of my life. Their relationship is completely transactional to the point where Cyril comes home, and she's like, I only have an hour, and him and Dedra are just staring at each other, and she's like, fine, I'll give you what you want. She's like, turn off the lights. And so even the physical aspect of their relationship, Dedra wants no part in it, but she gives it to Cyril to keep him happy or keep him in line, or at least she thinks she's keeping him in line. And Cyril, as a man, is using her to fulfill his own physical desires and needs. And so there's no real love there, which is not surprising. Of course, we knew that, but it's good to have that juxtaposition between the good guys and the bad guys and how they treat relationships and their worldview on connection and love. All right, so now diving into the individual character arcs that we see over these 3 episodes. The first one I'll talk about is Bix. She is completely traumatized from what the Empire has done to her, but it's also implied that she has started to go on some missions with Cassian, and the repercussions and the consequences of those missions are still weighing on her. We hear them talk about a recent mission where Cassian had to kill a kid who we think is a newly enlisted Imperial soldier because he saw Bix's face and Cassian wants to protect her. So now she's having trouble sleeping at night, not only from the trauma and PTSD of being tortured and almost being sexually assaulted in the previous episode, but also now she's kind of involved in a rebellion and she's seeing the realities of war. And so she has a rough 3 episodes where she's stuck in the apartment and she starts taking drugs to help her sleep and also just numb the pain. We get a great scene with her and Luthen where he says, hey, they work for a little bit and they'll help you sleep, but when you stop taking them, the dreams will come back even worse. In general, we get to see Cassian and Bix's relationship in full form in a way we hadn't seen before. In season 1, it was very tenuous between them and was really built on history. He seemed like the bad boy, rebellious boyfriend who was always sneaking out of her house, and it maybe wasn't ever very mature of a relationship and was more of a fling, but they cared about each other. But now we see very tender moments between them. The scene where they're dancing together and they're doing some sort of ritual where they're cutting their palms in half with their own hands, and it looks like a ritual. I don't know if it's something from Ferrix or not, but it's really beautiful. And when they see each other for the first time after Cassian's away, they embrace each other, they joke together. It's nice to see because it's been kind of alluded to for a long time, and now we see it in its full form. And while I think the exploration of Bix's PTSD and her current drug addiction is all good, and I think Cassian trying to hold it all together is compelling, I do take issue with the end of this arc, which feels super abrupt and shoehorned into the final episode. Bix essentially goes from one scene where she's doing drugs again and she's staring out the window, kind of zonked out, and she sees a signal from Luthen, and Cassian comes in and he has a mission that we later find out is to kill the doctor that tortured Bix. And she's like, you have to take me with you, while she's still not all there. She's not present. She's still in the drug fog. And then the next time we see her, she is in the office with the doctor. She puts the headphones on him. She turns up the device and leaves him there. Her and Cassian then leave and then blow up his office. And I get this is supposed to be a liberating moment, and it's supposed to be like a badass ending where Bix gets her revenge and she's all in on the rebellion, but it feels like there was a jump between those two scenes that we didn't get to see. And like I mentioned, I think a lot of those scenes with Cyril on Gorman could have been shaved down a bit to make room for another scene here with Bix kind of coming to the realization that she has to take back control of her life because she's spiraling. But we don't see that, and I think the scene that implies that is very vague in the way it's presented with her and Cassian seeing Luthen's signal. I guess they were trying to say that Cassian going to Luthen and threatening him got through to Luthen, and then this is the olive branch that he's extending to them, saying like, hey, my informant on the inside is now working for that doctor. He knows exactly where he is. I need you to go kill him. And that's what Cassian's mission was. And then Bix is like, I want to join. And we won't get any more context because we will have another year-long time skip between this episode and the next one. So unfortunately, I feel like all the work that went into building up this liberation arc for Bix from the Empire just feels undercut by a very quick and abrupt ending. At least that's how it felt for me. I'm curious what other people think. I've already touched on a lot of aspects of Cassian's storyline in these 3 episodes, but the last thing I want to talk about is his undercover mission to Gorman and just seeing how much of a veteran he is at not only reading people, but also assessing situations. The first scene we see him on Gorman, the girl comes to get a drink and they start talking and he's like, well, you just gave me up and you gave yourself up and now everyone's screwed. You have to be smarter. And he tells the main guy of the liberation movement, like, hey, you guys are out of your mind. You shouldn't be doing this. And he's right, because it's a really interesting situation where we as the audience know more than the characters. We know that the ISB is playing everyone on Gorman, and this liberation movement is playing right into their hand by stealing from these shipments. And Cassian even calls it out. He's like, you know, the ISB, they do this for a living. They plant information. They manipulate populations, and you're playing right into it. It brings up a really interesting conflict where the Gormans are in a lose-lose situation where they have to rebel, and the show has built up rebellions as the right thing to do. You shouldn't sit by and let the Empire walk all over you. But at the same time, by rebelling, you're playing right into what the Empire wants. But Luthen reminds us still that it's all worth it in the end. Even if Gorman goes up in flames, the entire galaxy will see it. It's a huge symbol that this wealthy, well-known planet rose up against the Empire. So yeah, I liked Cassian's arc over these 3 episodes. I liked Diego Luna's performance, how he was able to slip in and out of his alias on Gorman, and I'm very curious to see what he does in the next 3 episodes where Gorman starts going south and maybe he feels responsible for not doing more up front. Next, I want to talk about Saw, who I've never connected to more than I have in these 3 episodes. It shows why he's a compelling leader. It shows how he's survived. It gives you that deep dive into his worldview in the most clear way that we've seen. He's been in everything from Clone Wars to Rebels to Rogue One, and this was the clearest I ever saw. And the scene with him and Wilmon was by far my favorite scene of these 3 episodes. When he was given that speech and he was like, "Let it run free, let it run wild," I was like ready to jump through a brick wall. I was so amped up by that. I was really, really impressed by Saw here in these episodes. Next, I want to talk about my queen, Mon Mothma, who, as I mentioned, felt like a sidelined character in these 3 episodes, which was disappointing to me because at the end of the last arc, she is broken. She loses her closest friend. She gives up her daughter finally. She's alone at this point. And a year later, I feel like she still feels the same and not much has changed about her character. I would have thought there would have been more of a shift. Maybe she would be more cold. Maybe she would be more distant, but she still feels like that typical Mon that I love, but I also do want to see her character change a bit because of all of these terrible things that she's going through. Really, in this arc, all we see is that she is becoming more alone in the Senate, and more senators are afraid to speak out to any degree against the Emperor and his plans. And while I enjoy the scene of her montaging through and talking to a bunch of different senators about gaining their support, I do feel like there should have been a more personal scene mixed in here with just her reflecting on this new reality she's living in without her daughter, without Tay, without anyone. And while I like her going toe-to-toe with Krennic in the antique room and them talking about, well, your rebel is a terrorist to me, and everyone feeling very tense, like, oh shit, it's happening, I just feel overall there was more room to explore her character during this time period. And considering we're getting another 1-year time jump, I don't want to waste these opportunities to get an insight into Mon's life. We haven't seen the whole season. I'm curious to see where they go in the next episode, if she has her outburst against the Imperial Senate, or if that's in the next arc after that. I don't know, but I just want the best for my queen. That's all. I just want the best for her. Speaking of Mon and Krennic going at it, I do want to talk about 2 other characters that were in the room during that conversation, Luthen and Kleya. As I mentioned, I loved Kleya in this episode, and I really loved the relationship between Kleya and Luthen. Again, I hadn't seen them in this light before, and I've never connected to their relationship more than I have in these 3 episodes, because it's always been an anxiety-filled relationship. They're constantly trying to hold together this fledgling rebellion. They're trying to keep secrets. They're trying to watch each other's backs, Kleya more than Luthen. But it's always felt very serious, and there wasn't many moments of levity, but this last scene between them when they're leaving the gala and she nonchalantly hands over the listening device to Luthen, and he's like, we were just in the room with Krennic. We could have killed him right there. And they both laugh it off, and you could just feel that underneath all of that anxiety and tension between them, there's so much love and trust that they've built over the years. And even though we've only seen a very small portion of their relationship, and they were very established in season 1, you could tell that there was years and years of time they spent together in the mud, building this up and having each other's backs. And I think this last scene just tied it together so beautifully, like we've never seen before, and I really enjoyed that. I've already talked about Cyril a lot throughout this episode, and even though he's tied to a lot of my critiques, and I do think some of his scenes could have been shaved down, I do really like him, and he's come around a lot from the first season. I think in the first season, he was an interesting character and someone to pity, but now he's someone that you're kind of enjoying because he has some comic relief to him, but he's also capable in his new role, and you want to see where he goes. Like, does his ambition take him past Deidre? Does he break away from his mother? Where does he go? And I really enjoyed him kind of sneaking in with the liberation movement and doing his part. He's just connected to a lot of the great world building in this episode, which also makes me appreciate him as a character. And he's also tied to a lot of the intrigue and show don't tell that the first half of these episodes have when they're on Gorman, where you don't know the full scope of the game that the ISB is playing, but you also don't know where the Liberation Front is. Are they smarter than they appear, or are they really lost when it comes to rebellions? Cinta and Vel finally have their reunion, and Cinta acknowledges that these past couple years have been hard, and it makes sense. She's been Luthen's hitman. She's probably killed dozens of people. She's been out on her own. She's been rebellion first, and she has taken up the doctrine of not having any connections and cutting herself off from everyone but the rebellion. And it's weighed on her, and she finally admits that, and it's very cathartic to see them come back together. In true Andor fashion, it doesn't last too long because she catches a stray bullet from one of the Gormans who brings a gun to the mission when they said, do not bring guns. He tried to be a hero, and it got Cinta killed. I'm never a fan of the stray bullet from a struggle killing a main character trope, but in the context of Andor, it makes sense because Cinta is someone who should get her heroic death for all that she's sacrificed and all the good she's done for the rebellion, but she dies in just a senseless, random way. And Vel kind of losing it in the middle of a mission, where it's funny that they start the mission, they start the briefing with Vel and Cinta being the serious ones, like, hold it together, this is the mission, and then by the end, Vel is the one that couldn't hold it together. So it was kind of a cool flip. And again, I'm curious to see where her character goes now. Like, does she become, like, super hardened like Cinta became, or does she leave the rebellion? Like, I don't know. It's very, very interesting. I'm sure I'm missing some things. Again, these were super dense episodes with a lot of detail, a lot of world building, but overall, I did really enjoy them. The last thing I want to talk about is the score. Nicholas Britell, who did the first season, did a fantastic job. It's one of my favorite Star Wars scores, one of my favorite scores in general for TV or movies. And he did not return for season 2. I didn't know that going in, and I think his presence not being there is felt. The music is not bad. I'm not trying to shame the current composer of season 2. I am, however, saying that the music has felt like less of a character than it did in season 1. The motifs are returning for a lot of the characters in different reorchestrated ways, but the new original stuff doesn't hit the same. 6 episodes into season 1, I felt like we had some real amazing original scores, and 6 episodes in here, I don't really feel that. I feel the one scene where that's not true is the Saw Gerrara and Willem scene. I thought the score there was awesome, but outside of that, the score I felt was such a big character in season 1, and it just has fallen to the wayside, unfortunately, and it just sucks that Nicholas Britell couldn't return for season 2 for some reason. I wish he was here because I know he would have elevated a lot of this stuff that's already amazing. So I forgot to mention this point in my first review of Andor season 2, but I knew I had to bring it up here. But I'm rooting for this composer for the rest of the season. I want him to bring something new and fresh and something that will hit the same as Andor season 1 score did. All right, well, I could go on forever. As always with Andor, there's so much to dissect and dive into, but I think I'll call it right there. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you're watching this on YouTube, please leave a like, a comment, and subscribe. If you're listening on a streaming platform like Spotify or Apple, please leave a review, hit the notifications button so you know when I'm dropping new episodes. And if you want to follow me on Instagram at @star_wars_markofbalance, that would be great as well. As always, stay safe, stay healthy, and may the Force be with you. Peace.